Hey everybody, it's me in the same exact clothes. No, I don't know how to do laundry. I've just been sitting here. No, that's a joke. As you know, I'm currently on vacation and unable to record, so I split this video into two parts. I hope nobody minds. This week we're going to be going over the lost plot of the Until Dawn beta version, basically. Last week we went over all of the characters and designs and small details in its overall development, and now we're just going to sort of get into the plot of each chapter and go over what happened. So, Chapter 1 was pretty much the exact same. The only difference is that Chris was sleeping near the cable car station and Sam thought he was dead, but overall, pretty much bar for bar exactly what we got. So for Chapter 2, the biggest change overall is that the characters aren't introduced individually. We don't really have those quick zoom-ins with the name and little bio thing. Actually, the way we meet all the characters is through Sam and Chris after they make it through the cable car station. So first they meet Emily and Matt, and Emily and Matt are arguing about lost chapstick currently. Which is meant to sort of sum up their whole relationship, that she's just bossing him around the whole time. Emily and Matt then explain that they ran into Jessica, and Emily says, "Any more perfume on that bee and you'd think that she was at a bachelorette party." Whatever that means. Then they head up to the lodge. Then on their way up, Chris and Sam actually get scared by Mike, who jumps out and jump scares them. Obviously this was changed to him scaring Emily and Matt. Afterwards, Sam and Chris run into Ashley, and Sam tells Ashley and Chris to go get a room. Then eventually they make it to the cabin where Chris and Josh end up meeting, and they eventually have to find their way in, just like the original game. This is where Sam overtly flirts with Josh. She says something along the lines of if he wants her to warm up his fingers so he can get the door unlocked, and this makes Josh a little uncomfortable. I feel like that's very, very overt and almost out of character for Sam. Not that she isn't blunt in the main game, but just the fact that flirting like that is so aggressive. Just like in the final version, Jessica and Emily end up fighting, and Josh has to break it up. And then Mike and Jess go to the other cabin. Chapter 3, pretty similar. The walk to the cabin is a little bit different. Mike tells a story about Native Americans, and then he also mentions how as a child he almost died in a bike accident. Then Jessica has a quote basically along the lines of, "I didn't figure you was the glass half empty type," which is largely the same as in the final game. Jessica then finds a minor photo, which would end up being found by Emily in Chapter 7 of the final game. Her speech when they enter the cabin is largely the same, and once again she's pulled out through the window. Mike goes out chasing after her. Ashley, Chris, and Josh in Chapter 4 are using the Ouija board. Once again, Josh runs off. They later hear him scream. And as opposed to the final game where you have to choose between Ashley or Josh, it's just Josh in the trap, or rather a dummy of him. The psycho would then explain that you need to solve a puzzle in order to save him, but no matter what, he gets killed in this trap. Some of the chapters were sort of split up, so I'm going to say 5A and 5B, and have sort of A and B labeled for a few of these upcoming chapters. So 5A, for example, Ashley and Chris make it back to the lodge where she tells Emily and Matt what's going on. Emily insists that they must go get help, and then Matt and Emily go to the cable car station. After spotting it on the map, Emily and Matt make it to the fire tower where Matt ends up calling the park ranger service, and then both of them end up falling off of it into the mines. In Chapter 6, Emily's mine section takes place here instead of in Chapter 7 in the final game. She cuts herself down with a glass shard, wanders through the mine, finds Hannah's clothes as well as her diary and entries related to Mike. This is also where in the final game, like I said, she finds that photograph. She also runs into the stranger, but this time it's in the form of a jump scare. So we're going to sort of breeze through some of these smaller chapters here, like 7A, 7B, 8, and that. So Chapter 7A, Mike sees the sanatorium, explores it. He does this in Chapter 5 in the final game. He then, in 7B, continues exploring the sanatorium, largely pretty much the same. In Chapter 8, Sam is caught by the psycho. This is the same, bath scene as in the final game, and it's largely the same. This is also where all of my Sam Josh shippers out there have that scene where he says sorry before he like kidnaps her, and I've seen so many good edits with that. In Chapter 9, Chris and Ashley naturally search for her, and apart from the original clues like the light bulb catalog, things like that, they can also find a torn-up cheerleading outfit. And this is where Chris is a lot more argumentative and takes more jabs at his friends. For example, he takes a jab at Jessica, for example, by saying that Sam is resourceful and intelligent, not some airheaded blonde bimbo. Then Ashley will ask if this is a reference to Jessica and will defend her, saying that Chris doesn't always have to trash her. And then Chris would reply, "But it's so easy." He also blatantly tells Ashley to calm down because she's flipping out over claiming to see Hannah's ghost. Which, once again, he fits a lot more into that archetype that you often see paired with the druggy type in a slasher flick. Think of in the Friday the 13th remake, where you have, I think he goes by like Scooby or something like that, I don't know. But there's the pair in that movie where they're both the comedic relief. They're both smoking pot the whole time. It's the one guy, he ends up using his friend, Jason Voorhees ends up using his friend as bait in the remake, which, by the way, that remake is underrated as hell. I recommend watching it. It's pretty solid. But anyway, so they basically, it's very similar because they also constantly take jabs at the sort of cool guys in their friend group, and they're a little more abrasive, but they're really, really fun characters. And that's sort of the vibe I'm getting from this iteration of Ashley and Chris. So, in Chapter 10, Emily runs away from the stranger, not knowing that he's not hostile. She ends up getting chased by a Wendigo, and the same sort of QTE happens where she has to close the metal door, and then she zip lines to safety. Gets to the upper part of the mine and then zip lines away. So Chapter 11, like I said, we never get to see Josh sort of unmask himself and wahaha, I'm the psycho the whole time. It just sort of gets to that point where they're discussing in the basement, Sam, Ashley, and Chris are discussing Mike tying up Josh in the shed. Then they see Emily being chased by a Wendigo on these TV screens, and they're saying that they have to let her in. They then head upstairs and open the door for her. The stranger enters, but instead of showing him explain everything, they show a cutscene which in the final game is known as the events of the past. And the ending of the cutscene is a little different, as Jack proclaims, "Now the Wendigo has returned and we are all in danger." He and Chris will retrieve Josh from the shed and he will eventually be killed, although not beheaded like in the final version. Once again, I feel like a broken record, but Chapter 12 has some differences. For example, Emily doesn't get bit, so that is never discussed in this version of the game. They discuss whether or not Chris is dead or alive. Mike tells the group that he will find Josh and get the cable car keys, and he asks Emily to come with him, to which she complies. Ashley heavily disagrees with this. Ashley then turns to Sam and says that she being Emily, is playing a selfish game and she will get us all killed. Which is to say that she thinks that Emily is just going to try and get back with Mike since, she thinks she's so evil, I guess. Ashley can then go talk to Chris about, them confessing their love for each other in one of the traps. And basically, Chris says they shouldn't talk about it until they are, quote, out of here. Basically, Sam then reads the stranger's journal and basically reads the part about the Wendigos being in the sanatorium, and this is where they decide to go after Mike and Emily because that's exactly where they're headed, and they have to try and stop them. They eventually get into the tunnels where they claim to hear Jessica. However, we're not certain if they do, and they end up looking for her because they believe she'll get killed if they don't. So Mike and Emily make their way through the sanatorium. Mike repeatedly flirts with Emily, which is a little odd, because I feel like, he's kind of an asshole in the original game, but he's a likable asshole, you know what I mean? So Mike then presses a button which releases the Wendigos. They have to sort of fight them off and run away. Eventually they make it out and Mike has to fend off these Wendigos towards a wood chipper where he's able to turn it on and the Wendigos get shredded. So this Chapter 14 is also a little dense, so I'll just be reading it right off of my script. I know as much as I'm able to directly look at the camera and talk for most of my videos, I don't memorize these. I write them and then I just sort of read and then look, read and then look. I do wish I had some sort of screen that I could like scroll down, but I'm shooting this in my dorm. I really don't have much to work with. So Emily and Mike, after journeying through the sanatorium, walk in the mines. They run into Sam, Chris, and Ashley. Sam urges the group to find Josh and the key. Emily and Sam eventually look for Josh and Matt together, descending down into the mines while the rest of the group stays behind. The player has to solve this sort of mini puzzle with lining up containers. While in the original game, Sam and Mike find their friends' bodies, in this version, Mike's role is swapped with Emily. After making their way through another section, they will find Jessica, if she died, locked up in a cage in the mine, and they will question what happened to her. Sam will later find Matt as well, and they, strangely enough, will have no reaction, really. It's kind of odd. Sam and Emily can also go find Chris and Ashley's bodies together in a coffin. If they survived, it will be empty. The two will then find Josh and ask what happened to him. He will apologize and say it's all his fault. He will give Sam and Emily the cable car keys and tell Emily that Matt is down here too. The three then make their way up to the elevator, which gets halted by a wooden plank that jams it. Josh is then adamant about stepping outside. He removes the plank and is confronted by the Wendigo, recognizing Hannah's locket. The elevator with Emily and Sam ascends while Josh is attacked. Chapter 15, super quick. Matt is seen in the mine where he may find Jessica. They talk about the Wendigo and make their way out. So really a lot of that chapter, the reason it's so dense is because it's dependent on who survived and who's died to this point, which that is something with the summary. We don't know tons about the sort of, if this thing happens and this thing happens. We only know sort of the through line if almost everybody survives. But it's still very interesting, and those details of the coffin, for example, or the cage, it seems like it's pretty clear that Matt dies. However, it also, chapter 15 talks about if he's alive, he might find Jessica, where if she's also alive, they'll talk about the Wendigo and escape. And this chapter 16, this final chapter, is very, in my opinion, reminiscent of like a horror movie from this era. It's very different from the ending that we ended up getting, and it's a little more like cut and dry, and a lot more like action hero-y sort of thing. So Sam and Emily are in the elevator. Emily mentions that the Wendigo was Hannah, and they wonder what happened to her. They make it to the surface, but get separated, where Sam gets attacked by a Wendigo, and she has to fend it off with the flamethrower, presumably from the stranger. They eventually make it to the cable car station, where she meets up with Chris, Ashley, and Mike. At the lower cable car station, the survivors get into the car and they end up starting to get away when a Wendigo attacks. Sam has to sort of punch it away, use the flamethrower, whatever, gets it away. The cable car ends up crashing and the game fades to black as the sun's rising and the survivors step out of the crashed cable car. And that's where the game ends. I would say a lot less satisfying than what we ended up getting. The final sequence in the house where sort of all of your actions truly come together, I think is a lot more satisfying, as well as, burning down the house, the sun's rising. It's very, very cinematic. This version, Emily gets separated. We don't really know what happens to her, things like that. So it's a little odd, some of these smaller things that have changed. And I feel like overall the story and the actors benefited, the actors who stayed and a lot of these new actors benefited from the style change from PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 4 because it's a lot more, I think it's a lot more cohesive overall as a story, because being constricted to using the Move controller, or really any sort of gimmicky controller, will harm your story, in my opinion. That's why we get a lot fewer details, a lot fewer threads end up being tied together. Overall, it just feels like a schlocky slasher film. However, this final version, while it is still, based on a slasher film, I do feel that it's a lot more satisfying and a lot more cohesive. This is a few interesting things that I kind of noticed while writing this, and I'm glad I've jotted this down. There is no footage of Ashley and Chris in the gun trap. That's the trap where they confess that they love each other, that they mentioned earlier in an earlier chapter. Which I think is interesting because that is very important. Maybe it hadn't been finished yet because this is the beta version. I think that's something that we can account for with a lot of these loose threads, such as where's Emily, sort of what happens to certain characters. That could just be a symptom of it being a beta, as well as the fact that there's no footage of Josh revealing himself to be the Psycho, or Chris and Mike tying him up in the shed. And once again, Emily was a lot bigger in this version of the game, accompanying Mike to the sanatorium, which would have been interesting to explore that relationship in that way, that these two people who may still have some feelings for each other, having to work together once again. But ultimately, with the exception of Wolfie, Mike is alone in the sanatorium. So that is it for the Until Dawn beta, early version, whatever you want to call it, and its original plot. Let me know what you think in the comments if you would have liked to see this version. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. Have a great Thanksgiving, and have a good morning or evening or, whatever.